Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're going to be tagging along with the Man of Steel, talking about my adventures with Superman in the gray area, coming up right now. When is a critic not a critic? Now, this isn't a joke, I'm genuinely asking. The recently premiered My Adventures with Superman is a children's show. The target demo for the show is between 8 and 12 years old. Let's get that out of the way and make it perfectly clear right from the off. This is a show for children. It's not been conceived with adults in mind. Attracting, tantalizing, or holding the attentions or intellects of anyone over the age of 15 on the highest end is not a goal this show has. I will be, in the year of this publishing, hobbling Weasley across the line to 47 years old. This show is not meant for me. And as I have no children of my own, I can't see the show through the eyes of a child, so I won't know what grabs their attentions and what they don't care for. I can try and put myself in a place where I contextualize the material by the knowledge of who it's intended for, but that still has to get out and through all 47 years of me and my specific perspective. Like anyone else, in the end, I can't not be who I am, and I've worked too damn hard and been through too damn much not to embrace the me I've turned out to be. I'm also, unless my analytics are leading me merrily astray, not addressing the audience the show was meant for. I doubt there are virtually roaming gangs of 10-year-olds wandering the internet looking to hear me explain the difference between film and digital IMAX, or being particularly interested in my thoughts on John Milius's Big Wednesday, which is a film you should all make time to see. Hell, the show's target demo shouldn't even be allowed within the smell of my musings due to my general affinity for use of big brain words like shit, fuck, and ambidextrous. The only people who should be engaging with any thoughts I might have about a new Superman show intended for an audience a quarter of my age should be people in my general age bracket who are similarly interested in where and how American superhero material has evolved in our longish and brief lifetimes, and mistakenly believe I have anything of value to say about it. My Adventures with Superman, like a lot of cartoons these days, takes cues from Japanese anime, which comes in many different flavors tailored to suit multiple demographics. The premiere episodes, presumably what will go on to be the template the series will follow, are directed by Jen Bennett and Diana Huh. Bennett and Huh, along with many of the producers, writers, and artists, have experience producing material for the show's demographic, having worked on projects like the Justice League action shorts, which aim to bring bite-sized superhero action to a young audience, DC Superhero Girls, which came at the heroes from a perspective aimed almost exclusively at young girls, mostly by way of its associated product lines, and the recent She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, a show that has its fans but also attracted a lot of negative attention for prioritizing performative culture messaging over good, solid storytelling. Now, you don't gather a group with this kind of pedigree together to make a show unless you have a specific kind of show in mind, and it doesn't take long to figure out what kind of show My Adventures with Superman is. With its cheery and upbeat tone, colorful, big-eyed, and rosy-cheeked character designs, an immediate focus on the humorous dynamic of the three clearly defined leads, with Superman series mainstay Jimmy Olsen elevated to Lois and Clark's peer instead of being portrayed as the young tag-along of classic yore, as well as highlighting the burgeoning romance between Clark and Lois, the show bears much resemblance to the shoujo flavor of anime. For those who don't know, like I didn't, shoujo is very broadly defined as an approach to storytelling meant to appeal to young girls. If the Clark-Lois meet-cute occurring within literally the first 5 minutes of the first episode didn't clue you into that the magical girl-style henshin, or transformation, that occurs when Clark gets the Superman outfit should really hammer the point home. Based on the context and presentation, along with the general shift in the focus of the superhero industry in an attempt to broaden beyond its traditionally mostly male market, this show seems to be a Superman show targeted primarily towards young girls. I'm not saying this to be derogatory or to imply that there's anything wrong with the show for this reason, nor am I saying that other people outside of that very broad category can't find something in the show that's engaging. But as far as broad categories go, when one is looking to describe perspectives, this is a shorthand that still works, and it dovetails nicely with a certain perspective held by some very online people about how a Superman narrative should be colored and shaped. When Superman as we know him was conceived in 1938, he was a rough and tumble action-adventure character that was targeted towards an action-adventure audience, and that just happens to be the kind of thing that attracts a certain crowd of people hardwired for adrenaline-pumping suspense and thrills. There is action in this show. I don't think you can totally divorce the character from that. But these first 2 episodes focus less on creating a narrative for action, drama, and thrills than one more suited for focusing on romance and character interplay. Even the title, My Adventures with Superman, seems to be less about the adventures Superman has and more about the adventures someone else has with him, baking the idea of relationships right into the fabric of the material. But Gray, you might ask, is it good? Is it a good Superman show? Now, the honest answer to all that depends on what you think Superman is. There is, or at least someone believes there is, a sizable enough chunk of the Superman fandom that believes Superman works best with this kind of juvenile approach because it allows the storytellers to present the narrative in a fantastically positive way, more supportive of what they see as the character's cheerful idealism than you might find in something that's aiming for a greater level of drama. If that's what you want to see in your Superman, then this is a show you'll likely enjoy. The further your interest in the character drifts from this very youth-friendly portrayal, the less interested you're likely to be. It's interesting that the supposedly in-production Batman Caped Crusaders is aiming to be the opposite of this show, with executive producer Bruce Timm being quoted as saying he plans to do things there he wasn't allowed to do with the insanely influential Batman the Animated Series. As no one seems interested in proposing any Batman material aimed at the same audience as My Adventures with Superman, it only reinforces the idea that in some very practical ways, as literary characters, the Man of Tomorrow just doesn't measure up to the Dark Knight, something no fan of either character actually believes is true. I've asked myself this question before. Is it fair for me to express an opinion on material like this? I'm sure the people who make it, the writers and artists and voice actors and maybe even some of the executives for all their reptilian overlording, I'm sure they all put legitimate care and effort into the work and they really want to create something to be proud of that their audience will enjoy. I'm not a monster and I can appreciate the effort, but again, they aren't making it for me. One of the producers of the show made a comment that part of their goal was to release something that kids, teens, and adults could all sit down and watch together. The episodes themselves are to run on Adult Swim, famous for shows like Rick and Morty, Infinity Train, and Metalocalypse, before premiering on the Max streaming service and being rerun on Toonami. But as I've been trying and apparently failing to communicate to people, the network the show airs on doesn't change the substance of the material. The fact that it premieres at midnight to give those who don't subscribe to the Max service a chance to DVR it and watch it on the premiere day doesn't suddenly mean the show leaps the maturity divide like a tall building. Adult Swim isn't even a network, it's a programming block. Scheduling the show in that block doesn't mean the people making it are trying to cut into Superjail's audience. None of this has anything to do with what people will enjoy. I enjoyed Disney's The Owl House, and that is not a show that was made specifically for someone my age, gender, or sexuality. But while enjoying the show, I was honest enough to admit that I was watching a show intended for a much younger audience, and I wasn't watching it because it was challenging me in any way. I didn't try to make excuses about how the show was secretly more mature than it appeared. Not everyone making this stuff is playing four-dimensional chess. In my opinion, the show was exactly as mature as it appeared to be, and that's fine. It was a show that tackled concepts children could understand in a way they could understand within a presentation designed to engage and entertain them. Adults could sit down and watch the show along with the target demo. That doesn't mean the content magically rose to meet them for their effort. If you're making family entertainment, you craft the presentation from the bottom up, meaning you're servicing the youngest members of your audience first. If you can toss some things in there for the older kids and parents, that's great, but you're essentially just working for extra credit. Now, even though intellectually I understand the idea of looking at the show through the eyes of its intended audience, it's not something I could do even if I thought there was value in my doing it, as the landscape of entertainment had a very different geography when I was in the target range. I grew up watching Battle of the Planets, the American adaptation of the anime Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, Voltron, the Americanized version of the anime Beast King Go Line, Thundercats, which was the American version of Thundercats, Transformers, and most importantly to me, Robotech, the American version of the animes Super Dimension Fortress Macross, Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross, and Genesis Climber Mos Pieta. Many of these shows were looked upon as being too violent for their intended age group, with the American anime adaptations being sometimes heavily sanitized to be accepted by the standards and practices of the time. The people writing the shows knew they were writing for kids, but they still wanted to try and create some actual drama and stakes for their audience, even if they knew they could only push it so far. 1986 was the year I turned 10, and that year Transformers the movie was released. Sitting in the darkened theater with my father and my younger brother, I watched many of my Transformers heroes brutally massacred on screen in ways that I still find surprising. This stuff pushed limits for what was acceptable because the people making it felt like that was part of their job in helping kids grow up. My Adventures with Superman doesn't feel like it's being written with an attempt to push anything, not even toys at this point. Even while being compared to shows like Superman the Animated Series and Justice League, the show feels more tonally in line with the 1970s Super Friends series, colorful, peppy, and most importantly, safe. I feel like the audience the show somehow seems to be attracting, older teens and 20-somethings who say they're tired of what they call the relentless darkness and nihilism of modern superhero media, which should be read as filmmaker Zack Snyder's DC movies because that's what they tell me on Twitter. They should be more interested in the kind of stuff I was watching when I was 10 than the kind of stuff that's being made for 10-year-olds now. There's been an undercurrent of commentary over the last decade or so about how hard some young people are fighting not to grow up, and I've always given lenience to people that they're just fans of things and know where the lines are. Now, I'm beginning to question how true that is. Do I have opinions on the show? I absolutely do. I think the attempt to mimic the style of anime without putting in the kind of work those artists do misses the mark by a country fucking mile and results in a show that just doesn't look very good. There are one or two moments of what I would call well-considered animation in the first couple of episodes, but overall, I think the work looks pretty cheap. I don't find any of the characters cute or particularly amusing, and the writing is simplistic to the point of being annoying. When I say the show is for 12-year-olds, I feel like I'm being generous because as a TV PG rated show, the lower end of the scale is set significantly lower than. And while you can mix shonen or shoujo anime tropes into Western superhero storytelling, it's a rough mix to pull off. The two not only exist on different sides of a literary divide, but also a cultural one, with American ideas on how and why these things work being ignorant of the fact that the original target audience, Japanese youth, are raised in a very different environment from their Western peers. I'm sure the producers of the show would love to be able to put more work into their presentation, but sometimes business just doesn't allow for art to excel, and without a merchandise rollout to accompany the show, it doesn't look like the proper resources for that were in place. As for the writing, this is either what the people writing the show are capable of or just what they wanted it to be for their intended audience. It's really that simple. All that being said, the audience the show is meant for isn't going to care about any of that as long as they find the show engaging. Even if they know on some level that the show is kind of crap, as I knew about some of the shows I watched, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if they're engaged, they aren't actually watching that show. They're watching the show beyond the show, and that show is critic proof. Anecdotally, it's hard for me to imagine that the loud voices I hear cheering this show across the internet are basically adults between the ages of 19 and 30. But I have to remind myself of what they were being exposed to growing up. What they were getting in their entertainment in the late 90s and 2000s was very different from my 80s experiences. And on top of that, I have to remember that the people working on the show are probably not people in my age bracket either, and their experiences are probably more in line with these older fans. Everywhere I turn, I understand that my opinion really counts for very little in this discussion. I'm a 46-year-old man with wife, 3 cats, and a mortgage. This show isn't for me. But for a lot of people out there who may be exposed to this or who I may pass along the way as we all spiral out into oblivion, this show wasn't made for you either. You can watch it and you can find it entertaining, but in most respects, and with all due respect, you should not feel the show rises to meet your level on any level. My Adventures with Superman is a children's show, and most of us engaged in the conversation about it are not children. So, what the fuck are we even doing? I am not the right person to discuss this show. Even if I had kids, I think the most I could muster would be to gauge how appropriate the material is for that age group. And there is nothing about this show that's edgy or provocative in any way. A safer piece of superhero media you could not find. But does that make it a good show for kids? Is it providing them anything of value beyond colorful entertainment and the same kinds of life lessons they get from Sesame Street? That's still a thing, right? Are we adding any value to the idea of Western superhero storytelling by diluting it with influences that are arguably incompatible? And if you have to make such substantive change to the underlying structure of the superhero storytelling experience in order to attract a certain audience, is it fair to say that audience doesn't really want what you're selling? The fundamental elements of the superhero storytelling experience have always been action, adventure, tension, suspense, and drama. If you have to supplant that experience with something else in order to attract a disinterested audience, is that really the audience you should be trying to attract? I don't know how to talk about this show in a way that doesn't come off as either derisive or dismissive, and that's frustrating because this is what I do. It appeals to me as a curiosity and for literally no other reason. But does the fact that an adult doesn't find a children's show to be particularly engaging say anything about the show other than it probably won't do much for people over a certain age? How is that relevant? I love this kind of stuff, superheroes and all that, and I'm sure I always will. But at what point do I admit that unless I'm willing to spend the majority of the intellectual faculties that I've spent a not inconsiderable amount of effort amassing and allow myself to be wooed by the juvenile emotional outbursts and second grade moral philosophy so often on display, the chances of again encountering superhero material that challenges and stimulates me are most likely next to none. When do I finally admit when it's more than just this one show that isn't being made for me? I can criticize this show, but I can't be a critic of it. That wouldn't be fair to the show, the people making it, the audience it's intended for, or to me. And as an older nerd, it's really confusing for me to watch the show held up as some sort of high watermark for this kind of storytelling. But I have to remind myself that, as cliched as it sounds, I grew up in a different time. Not better or worse, just different. I don't share the same material building blocks as those half my age or more. I'd like to think that I have, at heart, nothing but the best of intentions for both the material and the audience more than I do some kind of weird anger at feeling pushed out or left behind. But maybe I am just an old man yelling at clouds. My Adventures with Superman is a children's show. Let's make it perfectly clear. This is a show made for children, and that means it's not a show made for me. So to answer the question, when is a critic not a critic? It's when they don't believe they can be, and they run the risk that at some point all they're really doing is complaining. That's no joke. It's not funny, and it's never any fun. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.